My name is Elena Rodriguez. I am 34 years old. And while I was unconscious during emergency spinal surgery that could have left me permanently paralyzed, my husband of 7 years moved his 23-year-old girlfriend into our penthouse apartment. The same penthouse in the building that I secretly owned through a trust my grandmother had established for me decades earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The foundation of this story begins 4 years ago, when I made what I believed was the smartest financial decision of my marriage. My grandmother, Isabella Rodriguez, had been a remarkably shrewd real estate investor who immigrated from Colombia in the 1960s, with nothing but determination and an extraordinary ability to recognize undervalued properties in emerging neighborhoods. By the time she passed away when I was 26, she had accumulated a portfolio of residential and commercial properties throughout Miami that provided substantial passive income. However, my inheritance came with specific conditions that my grandmother had established through her attorney. The properties were held in an irrevocable trust that would transfer to me gradually over a 15-year period, with the final transfer occurring on my 40th birthday. The trust was structured to provide income while protecting the assets from potential creditors, lawsuits, or marital dispute. Most importantly for this story, the trust documentation required absolute confidentiality about the asset ownership until the final transfer was completed. My grandmother had witnessed too many family fortunes destroyed by premature disclosure, opportunistic spouses, and poor financial decisions made under pressure. She designed the trust to protect not only the assets themselves, but also the beneficiaries from the complications that significant wealth could create in personal relationships. The legal documents explicitly prohibited discussing the trust assets with anyone, including spouses, until the final transfer was completed. When I married David Chen 3 years after receiving my inheritance, I was bound by these legal restrictions from disclosing the full extent of my financial resources. David knew that I had received some inheritance from my grandmother, but he believed it consisted primarily of modest savings accounts and a few small rental properties that generated supplemental income. He had no knowledge of the larger portfolio or the substantial trust fund that would eventually transfer to me completely. This secrecy was not intended to deceive David maliciously, but rather to protect both the assets and our relationship from the complications that premature wealth disclosure might create. My grandmother had specifically warned about how money could change relationship dynamics, create unrealistic expectations, and attract individuals whose affections were financially motivated rather than genuinely personal. David and I had met during my final semester at the University of Miami, where I was completing a master's degree in international business, while he was finishing his MBA with a concentration in investment banking. Our initial connection was based on shared academic interests, similar professional ambitions, and genuine compatibility that had nothing to do with financial consideration. He was attracted to my intelligence, work ethic, and entrepreneurial mindset, while I appreciated his analytical thinking, professional drive, and apparent commitment to building a successful career through his own effort. Our courtship progressed naturally through study sessions in the business library, coffee meetings to discuss case studies and projects, and weekend explorations of Miami's cultural attractions and restaurant scene. David was pursuing opportunities with several prestigious investment firms in New York, while I was considering positions with international consulting companies that would utilize my bilingual capabilities and cultural understanding of Latin American market. The romantic foundation of our relationship seemed solid and authentic. David was attentive without being possessive, ambitious without being ruthless, and supportive of my career aspirations without expecting me to subordinate my goals to his advancement. He came from a middle-class family in California where both parents were teachers, and he had financed his education through academic scholarships, work-study programs, and student loans that he was determined to repay quickly through career success. When David received an offer from Goldman Sachs in New York, we faced the decision of whether to continue our relationship long distance or pursue opportunities that would allow us to remain geographically close. I had received offers from consulting firms in both New York and Miami, creating the possibility of maintaining our relationship while both advancing our careers successfully. The decision to accept the New York consulting position and move to the city with David represented a significant commitment to our relationship's future. However, it also meant leaving Miami, where my trust assets were located and where I had been gradually learning about property management and real estate investment from the trustees who managed my grandmother's portfolio. The trust arrangements allowed me to maintain oversight of the Miami properties while living in New York, but it required regular communication with property managers, periodic visits for major decisions, and ongoing involvement in strategic planning for the portfolio's growth and development. I managed these responsibilities discreetly, traveling to Miami monthly for what I described to David as family obligations and personal business matters. Our New York period lasted 3 successful years during which both our careers advanced significantly. David excelled in investment banking, earning rapid promotions and substantial bonuses that allowed us to maintain a comfortable lifestyle in Manhattan. My consulting work with international clients provided opportunities for professional growth, while generating income that supplemented the trust distributions I received quarterly. The decision to marry occurred naturally as our relationship matured and our career trajectory stabilized. David proposed during a weekend trip to California to meet his parents, presenting a beautiful engagement ring that he had saved for months to purchase. The proposal was romantic and heartfelt, occurring during a sunset walk along the beach where he had grown up surfing as a teenager. Our wedding was intimate and meaningful, held at a boutique hotel in Napa Valley with immediate family members and close friends from business school. The ceremony reflected our shared values of hard work, family commitment, and mutual support for each other's professional and personal aspirations. We exchanged vows that promised partnership, honesty, and dedication to building a successful life together through combined efforts and shared dreams. The early years of marriage were genuinely happy and productive. We established routines that balanced demanding careers with quality time together, traveled internationally for both business and pleasure, and began discussing long-term goals including eventual family planning and retirement preparation. David's income growth allowed us to upgrade our living situation progressively, while my consulting income and trust distributions provided financial security that supported our lifestyle comfortably. However, the geographic distance from Miami created increasing complications for managing my trust responsibilities effectively. The properties required more attention as they aged, neighborhood dynamics changed, and development opportunities emerged that required prompt decision-making and hands-on involvement. The monthly trips to Miami became insufficient for proper oversight, and the trustees began recommending more active management of the portfolio. The solution emerged when David's firm offered him the opportunity to lead their new Miami office, establishing a presence in the growing Latin American markets that aligned perfectly with both his expertise and our personal circumstance. The position represented a significant promotion with increased compensation and equity participation, while also allowing us to relocate to a city where I could manage my family obligations more effectively. The decision to move to Miami felt providential for our marriage and career. David would have greater autonomy and responsibility in establishing the new office, while I could pursue consulting opportunities that utilized my local knowledge and cultural connections more effectively. The relocation also meant closer proximity to my remaining family members and the opportunity to be more involved in managing my grandmother's legacy property. We selected a luxury apartment in Brickell, Miami's financial district, that provided convenient access to David's office, while offering the sophisticated urban lifestyle that we had enjoyed in New York. The penthouse unit featured panoramic views of Biscayne Bay and downtown Miami, modern amenities that supported our professional entertaining needs, and proximity to cultural attractions and fine dining establishments that we valued highly. The apartment selection process was extensive and thorough, as we wanted to ensure that our new home would support both our current lifestyle and future family planning goals. David researched the building's financial stability management company reputation and neighborhood development trends, with the analytical thoroughness that characterized his professional approach to investment decisions. What David did not realize during this selection process was that I already owned the building through my grandmother's trust. The Meridian Tower had been one of her most successful acquisitions, purchased during the early stages of Brickell's development, when the area was transitioning from a residential neighborhood to a major financial center. Her investment thesis had proven remarkably prescient as the building's value had appreciated substantially, while generating consistent rental income from professional tenants who valued the prestigious address and modern amenities. The decision to live in my own building was strategic rather than coincidental. It provided the opportunity to monitor the property management closely, understand tenant satisfaction and building operations intimately, and make informed decisions about capital improvements and operational adjustments. Additionally, living in the building allowed me to maintain the confidentiality requirements of the trust while gaining practical experience in real estate management that would prove valuable when the assets transferred to me completely. David's enthusiasm for the apartment choice validated my grandmother's investment decisions, while providing personal satisfaction that our selected home represented sound financial planning and superior location selection. He was particularly pleased with the building's amenities, the apartment's layout and finishes, and the prestigious address that would support his professional networking and client entertainment responsibilities. The first 2 years of our Miami residency exceeded our expectations for both career advancement and personal satisfaction. David successfully established the new office, recruited talented professionals, and began generating substantial business from Latin American clients who valued Goldman Sachs's international expertise and local presence. His success was recognized through increased compensation, equity grants, and expanded responsibilities that positioned him for continued advancement within the firm. My consulting practice flourished through connections with international businesses seeking guidance for Miami market entry, local companies pursuing Latin American expansion, and real estate developers who valued my cultural insights and analytical capability. The work was intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding while allowing me to utilize the local knowledge and professional networks that I had been developing since college. Our social life in Miami provided the sophisticated urban lifestyle that we had enjoyed in New York while offering additional benefits of year-round outdoor activities, cultural diversity, and proximity to international travel destinations. We developed friendships with other professional couples, participated in cultural and charitable organizations, and established routines that balanced career demands with personal fulfillment and relationship maintenance. However, the demands of David's expanding responsibilities began creating subtle changes in our relationship dynamics that I initially attributed to normal career advancement pressure. He worked longer hours, traveled more frequently for client development, and expressed increasing frustration with what he perceived as bureaucratic limitations on his decision-making authority within the larger Goldman Sachs organization. These professional pressures manifested in personal behaviors that represented departures from established patterns in our marriage. David became more critical of our social obligations, more resistant to activities that he considered unproductive for career advancement, and more focused on networking opportunities that excluded me rather than events where we could participate together. The changes were gradual, and could be explained reasonably by the stress of establishing a new office, while maintaining performance standards expected by firm leadership in New York. I responded with increased flexibility and support, adjusting my own schedule to accommodate his demands and taking greater responsibility for managing our household obligations and social commitment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Additionally, David began expressing interest in upgrading our lifestyle in ways that seemed premature given our current income levels and long-term financial planning goals. He wanted to purchase a luxury automobile that exceeded our transportation needs, join exclusive clubs that required substantial membership fees, and consider purchasing a vacation property in the Caribbean that would require significant debt finance. These desires represented departures from the conservative financial planning approach that had characterized our marriage previously. David had always been disciplined about spending, focused on debt reduction, and committed to building long-term wealth through systematic saving and investment. The sudden interest in immediate gratification and status displays seemed inconsistent with his established values and priority. When I expressed concerns about the financial implications of these purchases, David became defensive and accused me of being overly conservative and unsupportive of his career advancement needs. He argued that his position required maintaining certain lifestyle standards that would support client relationships and professional networking opportunities essential for continued success. These conversations revealed underlying tensions about money, lifestyle expectations, and decision-making authority that had not surfaced during our New York period when our financial situation was more straightforward and our lifestyle requirements were more modest. The disagreements were resolved through compromise and discussion, but they established patterns of conflict that would become more significant as other pressures developed. The most troubling change was David's increasing secrecy about his work activities and social obligations. He began attending events that he described vaguely as client entertainment or professional networking without providing specific details about attendees, purposes, or outcomes. He would return from these events later than expected and seemed reluctant to discuss them beyond general comments about business development and relationship building. My attempts to participate more actively in his professional social activities were discouraged through explanations that most events were male-dominated networking situations, where spouse attendance was uncommon or potentially disadvantageous for relationship building. While these explanations seemed plausible given the nature of investment banking culture, they represented changes from our previous pattern of including each other in professional activities, whenever possible. The combination of longer work hours, increased travel, more frequent evening obligations, and reduced communication about professional activities created distance in our marriage that I attributed to temporary pressures associated with establishing the new office. I believed that once the initial challenges were resolved and the operation became more stable, our relationship would return to its previous level of intimacy and partnership. This assumption proved to be naive and ultimately costly as the real explanations for David's behavioral changes became apparent much later. The professional pressures were real, but they were compounded by personal choices and character weaknesses that I had not recognized during our courtship and early marriage years. The foundation for the betrayal that would ultimately destroy our marriage was being established during this period through David's gradual abandonment of the values and priorities that had originally attracted me to him. However, I was focused on supporting his career advancement and maintaining our relationship stability, rather than examining critically the significance of these behavioral changes. The trust fund restrictions that prevented me from discussing my true financial situation created additional complications because I could not address David's lifestyle desires through disclosure of resources that would have made his proposed purchases easily affordable. I was required to respond to his requests as if our household income consisted solely of our combined salaries, creating artificial financial constraints that may have contributed to his frustration and resentment. This financial secrecy, which was legally required and originally intended to protect our relationship, became a source of tension that undermined our partnership when external pressures created stress that demanded complete honesty and mutual support. The very protections that my grandmother had established to preserve family wealth began creating relationship problems that could have been avoided through full disclosure and shared decision-making. As our fourth wedding anniversary approached, I began recognizing that our marriage was experiencing serious challenges that required immediate attention and conscious effort to address. The distance that had developed between us was not resolving naturally as I had hoped, and David's behavior patterns were becoming more concerning rather than less problematic over time. I decided to suggest couples counseling as a proactive approach to strengthening our relationship and addressing the communication and intimacy issues that had developed. However, David dismissed this suggestion as unnecessary and potentially harmful to his professional reputation if colleagues or clients learned about it through mutual connections in Miami's professional community. His refusal to acknowledge relationship problems or seek professional guidance marked a turning point in my understanding of our marriage's trajectory. For the first time, I began seriously considering whether our relationship was as solid and committed as I had believed, and whether David's recent changes represented temporary stress or more fundamental shifts in his character and priority. The events that would ultimately expose the full extent of David's betrayal were set in motion during this period of growing distance and unresolved tension. However, I remained committed to preserving our marriage and worked harder to accommodate his needs and support his career advancement, believing that patience and dedication would eventually restore our previous partnership and intimacy. This commitment to preserving our marriage, while admirable in its intention, prevented me from recognizing warning signs and taking protective measures that might have limited the emotional and practical damage when the betrayal was finally revealed. The foundation of deception that had been building gradually over months was about to culminate in discoveries that would challenge everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the person I had chosen to share my life with completely. The transformation in David's behavior accelerated during our second year in Miami as his professional success reached new heights within Goldman Sachs. The Latin American division he had established was exceeding revenue projections by 40%, earning recognition from senior leadership in New York and positioning him for accelerated advancement within the firm's global operation. However, this professional triumph coincided with an increasingly troubling pattern of emotional withdrawal and secretive behavior that fundamentally altered the dynamics of our marriage. David's success had attracted the attention of Alexandra Morales, a 23-year-old junior analyst who had been recruited directly from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Alexandra possessed the combination of analytical intelligence, cultural fluency, and ambitious drive that made her exceptionally valuable for developing relationships with Latin American clients who represented the most lucrative opportunities for the Miami office's continued expansion. Alexandra's background included dual citizenship in the United States and Venezuela, fluency in Spanish and Portuguese, and family connections throughout Latin America that provided unique insights into business practices and relationship dynamics that could not be acquired through traditional banking training. Her father was a prominent businessman in Caracas who had maintained successful operations despite Venezuela's economic challenges, while her mother was a former diplomat who had served in embassies throughout South America. The professional relationship between David and Alexandra began appropriately as mentor and protege, with David providing guidance on client relationship management, deal structuring, and the strategic thinking required for advancement within Goldman Sachs. Alexandra's eagerness to learn and exceptional performance on initial assignments made her an obvious choice for increasingly important responsibilities within the Latin American division. However, the working relationship gradually evolved beyond normal professional boundaries as David began involving Alexandra in client entertainment activities that traditionally would have included spouses or occurred during standard business hours. These events were presented as essential networking opportunities that required Alexandra's cultural expertise and language capabilities to ensure successful relationship development with potential clients. The first indication of inappropriate boundaries emerged when David began scheduling dinner meetings with clients that extended well into the evening, often concluding at exclusive nightclubs or private parties where business discussions transitioned into purely social activity. David explained these extended events as necessary relationship building that reflected Latin American business culture's emphasis on personal connections and trust development. Initially, I supported these professional activities because I understood the importance of cultural sensitivity in international business development. My own consulting experience had taught me that relationship building in Latin American markets often required more extensive social interaction than typical American business practices. David's willingness to adapt to client expectations seemed evidence of his professional sophistication and commitment to the division's success. However, the frequency and duration of these evening activities began interfering with our personal time together in ways that suggested priorities had shifted substantially. David would return home after midnight several times each week, often explaining that client entertainment had extended longer than anticipated due to important business discussions or unexpected networking opportunities that could not be abandoned without damaging relationship development. These late returns were accompanied by changes in David's communication patterns and emotional availability that created distance in our marriage, despite our physical proximity. He became less interested in discussing his work activities in detail, providing general summaries rather than the comprehensive debriefs that had characterized our previous routine of sharing professional experiences and challenges. When I expressed curiosity about specific clients or business opportunities that required such extensive entertainment, David's responses became defensive and implied that I could not understand the complexity of Latin American business relationships due to my limited experience in investment.
investment bank. This condescending tone represented a significant departure from our established pattern of mutual respect and intellectual partnership. The defensive responses were particularly troubling because they suggested David was concealing information about his professional activities rather than simply protecting client confidentiality or avoiding repetitive business discussion. The change from open communication to guarded secrecy created suspicions that I initially tried to suppress out of loyalty and trust in our marriage commitment. David's weekend obligations also increased substantially as client relationship building extended into social activities that occurred outside traditional business hours. He began attending cultural events, sporting activities, and social gatherings that he described as essential for maintaining relationships with existing clients while developing connections with potential new business opportunities. These weekend activities often excluded me despite their social rather than strictly professional nature. David explained that client entertainment frequently involved group activities where the presence of spouses would alter relationship dynamics or create complications for business discussions that might emerge spontaneously during social interaction. The exclusion from David's expanded social activities felt increasingly personal rather than professional, particularly when I learned from casual conversations with other Goldman Sachs spouses that their partners typically included them in similar client entertainment events. The contrast between David's explanations and the experiences of other couples raised questions about the actual reasons for my exclusion from his professional social activity. My attempts to address these concerns directly with David resulted in arguments that revealed underlying tensions about autonomy, trust, and commitment that had not previously existed in our marriage. David accused me of being possessive and undermining his career advancement through demands for inclusion in professional activities where my presence might be counterproductive for relationship building and business development. These arguments followed a consistent pattern where David would initially become defensive about his activities, then transition to attacking my motives for questioning his professional judgment, and finally conclude with accusations that I was being unsupportive of his career advancement and the financial benefits that his success provided for our household. The argument structure was psychologically manipulative because it positioned my legitimate concerns about our relationship as selfish obstacles to professional success rather than reasonable requests for communication and inclusion. David's ability to reframe relationship discussions as attacks on his career created guilt that discouraged me from pursuing concerns that might otherwise have led to earlier recognition of inappropriate behavior. The financial argument was particularly effective because David's income had indeed increased substantially due to his professional success, providing lifestyle improvements that I genuinely appreciated and did not want to jeopardize through relationship conflict. The implication that questioning his activities might undermine our financial security created pressure to suppress concerns rather than address them directly. However, the most troubling aspect of these arguments was David's willingness to attack my character and motives rather than addressing the substance of my concerns about communication and relationship maintenance. This approach suggested a fundamental shift in how he viewed our marriage and my role as his partner rather than temporary stress associated with career advancement pressure. The pattern of late nights, weekend obligations, and defensive communication continued for several months while I attempted to maintain relationship stability through increased flexibility and reduced expectations for shared time and activity. I convinced myself that David's behavior represented temporary adjustments to demanding professional responsibilities that would resolve once the Latin American division became more established and required less intensive client development.
This rationalization was supported by David's continued expressions of affection and commitment during the limited time we spent together without professional distractions. He would acknowledge that his schedule had become demanding and promise that the situation would improve once major client relationships were established and the division achieved more predictable operational routines. These promises provided temporary reassurance while reinforcing my commitment to supporting his career advancement through patience and understanding. However, the pattern of behavior not only continued, but intensified as David's professional success created opportunities for even greater client entertainment responsibilities and business development activities. The introduction of additional junior analysts to the Latin American division provided opportunities for David to delegate some client entertainment responsibilities, which I hoped would reduce his personal obligations and create more time for our relationship. However, the opposite occurred as David assumed greater oversight responsibilities that required his presence at even more client events and social activities. Alessandra's role in these activities became more prominent as her language skills and cultural knowledge proved increasingly valuable for relationship development with the most important clients. David began describing her as indispensable for the division's continued success and essential for his ability to meet the revenue targets that would determine his advancement opportunities within Goldman Sachs. The frequency with which Alessandra's name appeared in David's explanations of his professional activities began creating discomfort that I initially attributed to jealousy rather than legitimate concerns about inappropriate boundaries. I attempted to suppress these feelings, because I recognized that successful business operations often required close working relationships between colleagues of different genders. However, David's descriptions of Alessandra consistently emphasized her personal qualities and exceptional capabilities in ways that seemed to exceed normal professional recognition. He would describe her intelligence, cultural sophistication, and relationship-building abilities with enthusiasm that suggested personal admiration beyond appropriate professional appreciation. These descriptions were accompanied by comparisons that implicitly criticized my own limitations in understanding Latin American business culture or contributing effectively to his professional success. David would note, Alessandra's ability to navigate complex cultural situations or develop client relationships in ways that highlighted my inability to provide similar support for his career advancement. The comparison pattern was psychologically damaging because it positioned Alessandra as an ideal professional partner while suggesting that I was inadequate for supporting David's career goals effectively. These implicit comparisons created insecurity about my value as a spouse while elevating Alessandra's importance in David's professional and personal satisfaction. My attempts to learn more about Latin American business practices or develop capabilities that might allow me to contribute more effectively to David's professional activities were met with discouragement and suggestions that such efforts would be inefficient given Alessandra's existing expertise and established client relationship. David's responses to my offers of increased professional support revealed that he preferred maintaining separation between his work activities and our marriage rather than finding ways to integrate our partnership more effectively. This preference suggested that the professional explanation for excluding me from his activities was incomplete or misleading. The emotional distance that developed as a result of David's changed behavior patterns extended beyond reduced time together to fundamental alterations in our communication and intimacy. David became less interested in discussing future plans, shared goals, or the personal dreams that had originally brought us together as partners committed to building a life together. Conversations about starting a family, purchasing a home, or planning for long-term financial security became infrequent and superficial rather than the detailed discussions that had characterized our relationship during the engagement and early marriage period. David's responses to these topics suggested that his priorities had shifted toward immediate professional advancement rather than long-term relationship development. The changes in David's behavior were gradual enough that I could attribute each individual incident to reasonable explanations while missing the cumulative pattern that revealed fundamental shifts in his commitment and character. The professional success that should have strengthened our relationship and provided foundation for future planning instead became the vehicle for emotional withdrawal and eventual betrayal. My grandmother's trust restrictions prevented me from addressing some of the underlying tensions through full financial disclosure that might have eliminated David's concerns about career advancement pressure or lifestyle limitations. The legal requirements for confidentiality meant that I could not reveal resources that would have made many of his professional anxieties unnecessary while providing alternatives for addressing his advancement ambition. The irony of this situation was that the very protections my grandmother had established to preserve family wealth and relationship stability were contributing to relationship problems that might have been avoided through complete honesty about our actual financial resources and long-term security. However, even full financial disclosure would not have addressed the character issues that David's behavior revealed during this period. The willingness to deceive, manipulate, and prioritize personal gratification over marital commitment reflected fundamental values, conflicts that would have emerged regardless of our financial circumstance. The foundation for the ultimate betrayal was established during this period, through David's gradual abandonment of the integrity and partnership commitment that had originally defined our relationship. The professional success that provided the opportunity and justification for inappropriate behavior also created the confidence and sense of entitlement that enabled David to rationalize increasingly serious violations of our marriage vows. As this pattern of behavior continued and intensified, I began recognizing that our marriage was experiencing challenges that required immediate attention and honest communication to resolve. However, my attempts to address these issues directly were consistently deflected through professional explanations and accusations that I was undermining David's career advancement through excessive demands for attention and inclusion. The stage was being set for discoveries that would reveal the true extent of David's deception and the complete erosion of the trust and commitment that had formed the foundation of our marriage. The professional distance that I had attributed to temporary career pressures was actually the systematic establishment of a double life that would soon be exposed through circumstances that neither David nor I could have anticipated. The medical emergency that would ultimately expose the complete breakdown of my marriage began with symptoms that I initially dismissed as ordinary stress-related discomfort. During the months when David's behavior patterns were creating increasing distance in our relationship, I had been experiencing persistent lower back pain that I attributed to long hours spent working at my computer while developing proposals for new consulting clients. The pain had been manageable through over-the-counter medications and periodic visits to a massage therapist who specialized in treating professionals who spent extensive time in sedentary positions. I convinced myself that the discomfort was temporary and would resolve once I completed several demanding projects that required intensive analytical work and report preparation. However, the pain gradually intensified and began radiating down my left leg in ways that interfered with my daily activities and professional responsibility. Simple tasks like walking to meetings or sitting through client presentations became increasingly uncomfortable, requiring conscious effort to maintain professional composure despite significant physical discomfort. The turning point occurred during a particularly demanding week when I was preparing a comprehensive market analysis for a telecommunications client considering expansion throughout Latin America. The project required reviewing extensive documentation, conducting multiple stakeholder interviews, and developing financial projections that would support strategic decision-making about market entry timing and resource allocation. The analytical work demanded long periods of focused concentration while seated at my computer, analyzing complex datasets and developing presentation materials that would communicate findings effectively to executive audience. The combination of physical stress from prolonged sitting and mental pressure from project deadlines created conditions that exacerbated my existing back problems significantly. On Tuesday morning of that week, I experienced severe pain that made walking difficult and sitting nearly impossible. The discomfort was unlike anything I had experienced previously, characterized by sharp shooting sensations that seemed to originate in my lower back and travel through my left leg with intensity that made concentration extremely challenging. Despite the severity of these symptoms, I attempted to continue working because the telecommunications project had firm deadlines that could not be adjusted without damaging client relationships and potentially losing future business opportunities. I modified my work environment by using a standing desk configuration and taking frequent breaks to change positions, believing that these adjustments would allow me to complete the project while managing the physical discomfort. David was traveling that week for client meetings in São Paulo, so I was managing the situation independently without the emotional support that might have encouraged me to seek medical attention more promptly. Our communication was limited to brief text messages about his business activities and my project deadlines, with neither of us focusing attention on personal concerns or health issues. The isolation during this medical crisis reflected the emotional distance that had developed in our marriage as David's professional activities increasingly excluded me from his daily experiences and decision-making process. The absence of supportive partnership during a period when I needed assistance managing both professional obligations and health concerns demonstrated how substantially our relationship had deteriorated. By Thursday, the pain had become so severe that I could no longer maintain professional activities effectively. I was forced to cancel a client presentation and postpone deliverable deadlines, while seeking emergency medical evaluation to understand the cause of symptoms that were clearly beyond normal stress-related discomfort. Sarah Martinez, the orthopedic specialist I consulted, conducted comprehensive examinations including physical assessments, neurological testing and diagnostic imaging that revealed the serious nature of my condition. The MRI results showed significant disc herniation at the L4-L5 level with compression of nerve roots that explained the radiating pain and threatened potential permanent neurological damage if not addressed immediately. Martinez explained that the condition required surgical intervention to relieve pressure on the affected nerves and prevent progressive damage that could result in permanent weakness or loss of function in my left leg. The procedure would involve removing portions of the herniated disc material and potentially installing hardware to stabilize the spinal segment affected by the injury. The timing for surgery was critical because delayed treatment could allow continued nerve compression that might cause irreversible damage. Martinez recommended scheduling the procedure for the following Monday to minimize risks while allowing sufficient time for preoperative preparation and coordination with the surgical team. The surgery recommendation created immediate concerns about recovery time, professional obligations, and the practical arrangements necessary for managing postoperative care requirements. Martinez explained that the recovery process would require several weeks of limited mobility followed by months of physical therapy to restore full function and strength. More significantly for this story, the surgery would require general anesthesia and postoperative monitoring that would leave me completely vulnerable and dependent on others for several hours during the procedure and immediate recovery period. The medical team would manage my care during hospitalization, but I would need reliable support for transportation, medication management, and basic activities during the initial recovery period at home. David's reaction to news about the surgery requirement revealed troubling priorities that foreshadowed the betrayal that would soon be exposed completely. When I reached him in São Paulo to explain the medical situation and surgery schedule, his initial response focused on the inconvenience that my health crisis would create for his business activities rather than concern for my well-being or offer of support during a frightening and vulnerable period. David expressed frustration that the surgery timing conflicted with client entertainment events he had planned for the weekend and a major presentation scheduled for the following week that he considered crucial for securing additional business from Brazilian clients. His response suggested that he viewed my medical emergency as an obstacle to his professional advancement rather than a serious health crisis requiring immediate attention and family support. When I requested that he return from São Paulo to provide support during the surgery and initial recovery period, David hesitated and suggested that the procedure was routine enough that I could manage independently with assistance from hired caregivers or nursing services. This response demonstrated a fundamental lack of understanding about the emotional support that patients need during major medical procedures beyond purely practical care requirements. The conversation revealed that David's priorities had shifted so substantially toward his professional activities and personal gratification that he no longer viewed our marriage as requiring the mutual support and commitment that serious situations demand from devoted partners. His reluctance to interrupt business activities for my medical emergency indicated that our relationship had become secondary to other interests and obligations. Eventually, David agreed to return from São Paulo on Sunday evening, providing minimal time for preoperative preparation and emotional support before the Monday morning surgery. However, his agreement came with expressions of resentment about the professional disruption and implications that I should have managed the situation more independently or scheduled medical treatment more conveniently. This response pattern continued David's established approach of making me feel guilty for having needs or expectations that interfered with his professional activity. The manipulation was particularly cruel in the context of a medical emergency where I had no control over timing or the necessity for immediate intervention to prevent permanent injury. The weekend before surgery passed with minimal communication from David, who claimed to be managing client relationship issues and preparing materials for business meetings that would be affected by his early departure from São Paulo. I spent the time alone managing preoperative requirements, ranging post-operative care services, and attempting to address anxiety about both the medical procedure and the lack of emotional support from my husband. Martinez had explained that spinal surgery carried inherent risks including potential complications from anesthesia, infection possibilities,
and rare but serious risks of permanent paralysis if unexpected difficulties arose during the procedure. These medical risks were frightening enough without the additional stress of managing the situation without adequate emotional support from the person who should have been my primary source of comfort and assistance. David returned to Miami on Sunday evening as promised, but his demeanor indicated that he viewed the situation as an obligation rather than an opportunity to provide loving support during a difficult period. He was distracted and impatient during conversations about surgery logistics and recovery requirements, suggesting that his attention remained focused on business concerns rather than my medical situation. The evening before surgery, David received multiple phone calls that he described as urgent business matters requiring immediate attention despite the late hour and his supposed commitment to providing preoperative support. These calls were conducted privately in his office, with explanations that client relationship issues were too sensitive for discussion in my presence due to confidentiality requirements. The pattern of secretive phone calls and divided attention continued even during this period when I needed his complete focus and emotional presence. The behavior demonstrated that whatever activities were occupying David's attention had become more important to him than providing support during one of the most vulnerable and frightening experiences of my life. Monday morning arrived with David appearing distracted and eager to complete hospital logistics quickly so he could address what he described as critical business issues that had developed overnight. His behavior in the preoperative area was perfunctory rather than supportive, with minimal conversation and obvious impatience with medical procedures that required time and attention. When the surgical team prepared to take me into the operating room, David's goodbye was brief and routine rather than the loving and reassuring farewell that would be appropriate for a procedure that carried serious risks and would require several hours to complete. His demeanor suggested relief that his hospital obligations were concluding rather than concern about my well-being during surgery. Martinez had explained that the procedure would require approximately 4 hours depending on the complexity of disc removal and any additional stabilization work that proved necessary during surgery. The anesthesia and post-operative monitoring would mean that I would be unconscious and vulnerable for most of the day, requiring David to remain available for medical updates and decision-making if complications arose. As the anesthesia took effect and consciousness faded, my final thoughts were about the emotional distance that had developed in our marriage and concern about whether David would provide adequate support during recovery if the surgery revealed more serious complications than anticipated. The medical vulnerability was compounded by relationship insecurity that should not have existed during such a critical health crisis. The surgery proceeded successfully according to Dr. Martinez's initial assessment, with complete removal of herniated disc material and decompression of affected nerve roots without complications that would have required additional interventions or extended recovery procedure. The neurological function appeared preserved and initial indicators suggested that the procedure would achieve the intended relief from pain and prevention of permanent damage. However, the post-operative monitoring revealed some unexpected complications that required extended observation and additional medical interventions to ensure complete stability before I could be safely discharged from the hospital. These complications were not life-threatening but required careful monitoring and adjustments to medication protocols that extended the recovery timeline beyond initial projection. Martinez attempted to contact David several times during the afternoon to provide updates about the surgery results and discuss the modified recovery timeline that would require additional hospital monitoring. However, David did not respond to phone calls or text messages for several hours despite having been specifically instructed to remain available for medical communications throughout the day. When David finally contacted the hospital in the early evening, his explanation for the delayed response was vague and unsatisfactory, involving business meetings that he claimed could not be interrupted even for medical updates about his wife's surgery. This excuse demonstrated priorities that were completely inappropriate for a husband whose spouse was undergoing major surgery with potential complications. The nursing staff noted David's absence and delayed communication in ways that suggested they found his behavior unusual and concerning compared to typical family responses during serious medical procedures. Their observations about inadequate family support added to my growing awareness that David's commitment to our marriage had deteriorated beyond normal relationship challenge. During the extended hospital stay required for post-operative monitoring, David's visits were brief and focused on logistics rather than emotional support or genuine concern about my comfort and recovery progress. He appeared anxious to conclude hospital visits quickly so he could return to other activities that clearly took priority over providing companionship during a difficult recovery period. The contrast between David's behavior during my medical crisis and the loving support that devoted spouses typically provide during serious health challenges revealed the complete erosion of partnership and commitment that had once characterized our marriage. The medical emergency had exposed character deficiencies that might have remained hidden under normal circumstances, but became obvious when genuine crisis required authentic caring and sacrifice. As I began recovering from surgery while still hospitalized, I started recognizing that the relationship problems I had been attributing to temporary career pressures were actually fundamental changes in David's character and priority. The medical crisis had provided a clear test of his commitment, and his response demonstrated that our marriage was no longer his primary concern or obligation. The discovery of David's ultimate betrayal was still ahead, but the foundation for understanding his character and the complete breakdown of our relationship was established during this period, when medical vulnerability revealed the absence of genuine love, commitment, and partnership that marriage requires during life's most challenging moments. The discharge from Miami General Hospital occurred on Thursday afternoon, 4 days after the spinal surgery that had successfully relieved the nerve compression while requiring extended monitoring due to complications with postoperative swelling and medication adjustments. Dr. Martinez had cleared me for home recovery with strict instructions for limited mobility, prescribed pain management protocols, and mandatory physical therapy appointments beginning the following week. David's behavior during the discharge process continued the pattern of distracted obligation rather than genuine concern that had characterized his hospital visits throughout the week. He arrived 20 minutes late for the scheduled discharge appointment, explaining that urgent client matters had detained him longer than anticipated at the office. The medical staff had been waiting with wheelchair transportation and discharge paperwork while David managed what he described as crisis situations requiring immediate attention. The ride home from the hospital provided the first opportunity for extended conversation since the surgery, but David's responses to my questions about household arrangements and recovery support were vague and evasive. When I asked about modifications he had made to accommodate my mobility limitations, he provided general assurances that everything had been prepared appropriately without offering specific details about accessibility arrangements or care logistics. David's demeanor during the drive suggested anxiety that extended beyond normal concern about my recovery process. He appeared nervous and frequently checked his phone for messages despite driving through Miami traffic that required careful attention. His distraction was concerning, because postoperative patients require careful transportation to avoid jarring movements that might compromise surgical healing. The Meridian Towers valet parking attendant, Carlos, greeted us with unusual formality that contrasted with his typically warm and familiar manner. Carlos had been working at the building since my grandmother's original purchase and had developed friendly relationships with long-term residents through his consistently professional and attentive service. His subdued demeanor suggested awareness of situations that he felt uncomfortable discussing directly. The elevator ride to our penthouse floor was conducted in silence, with David's continued phone monitoring and obvious impatience to conclude transportation logistics. His behavior suggested that hospital discharge represented completion of obligatory support rather than the beginning of home recovery assistance that devoted spouses typically provide during post-surgical periods. The key to our apartment door required more effort than usual, with David fumbling with the lock mechanism before successfully opening the entrance. His difficulty with familiar security systems seemed inconsistent with someone who had been residing in the apartment throughout my hospital stay and should have been accessing the residence regularly for normal activity. However, nothing could have prepared me for the scene that greeted us upon entering our home. The living room had been completely rearranged with unfamiliar furniture pieces, decorative accessories, and personal items that clearly belonged to another resident. The sophisticated neutral color scheme that I had carefully selected had been altered with bright accent pieces and artwork that reflected completely different aesthetic preferences. Most shocking was the presence of women's clothing, cosmetics, and personal accessories scattered throughout the main living areas in ways that indicated comfortable and established residents rather than temporary visitors. Expensive designer handbags, jewelry, and shoes were displayed displayed prominently as if the space belonged to someone who felt entitled to treat our home as her primary residence. The kitchen revealed evidence of extensive meal preparation and entertaining that had clearly occurred during my hospital absence. Premium ingredients, specialized cooking equipment, and imported wines filled the refrigerator and pantries in quantities that suggested sophisticated dinner parties and romantic meals that had been prepared and consumed while I was recovering from major surgery. David's reaction to my stunned silence was immediate defensiveness rather than explanation or apology. His prepared response suggested that he had anticipated this discovery and developed justifications for the obvious evidence of another woman's residence in our home during my medical crisis. "Elena, I can explain everything," David began with the carefully controlled tone that characterized his approach to difficult business negotiations. Alejandra needed a place to stay temporarily because her lease expired during the week and all the hotels were booked due to the Art Basel event. It was purely a practical arrangement to help a colleague during an emergency situation. The explanation was immediately recognizable as deception because Art Basel Miami Beach had concluded 2 months earlier, and no legitimate housing emergency would require moving personal belongings and redecorating our living spaces. David's willingness to lie so transparently demonstrated his belief that my post-surgical vulnerability would prevent me from challenging his story effectively. However, my professional experience in consulting had developed analytical capabilities that remained sharp despite pain medication and physical discomfort. The evidence throughout our apartment indicated deliberate establishment of shared residence rather than temporary emergency accommodation. The quantity and placement of Alejandra's belongings suggested intimate familiarity with our home's layout and comfort with claiming space that belonged to my marriage. "David, this explanation is insulting to my intelligence," I responded with clarity that surprised both of us. "Alejandra has clearly been living here as if this is her home. The question is how long this arrangement has been in place and whether you planned to inform me about this decision or simply hope I would accept it without challenge." The directness of my response appeared to catch David off guard because he had become accustomed to my accommodating approach to relationship conflict.
The medical crisis and post-surgical vulnerability had not diminished my ability to analyze evidence and draw logical conclusions about obvious deception. David's secondary defense strategy involved attacking my character rather than addressing the substance of my concerns. "You're being paranoid and unreasonable," he said with escalating frustration. "Alejandra is a valued colleague who needed assistance, and I provided temporary help during a difficult situation. The fact that you're creating drama about professional courtesy shows how selfish and unsupportive you've become." This response pattern was consistent with David's established approach to relationship conflicts, but the context made his manipulation particularly cruel. Attempting to gaslight someone who was recovering from major surgery while discovering obvious evidence of betrayal represented a level of callousness that revealed fundamental character defects. The sound of a key in our front door interrupted this confrontation and provided definitive evidence about the true nature of the situation. Alejandra entered our apartment with complete familiarity and comfort, carrying shopping bags and behaving as if she belonged in our home permanently. Her surprise at seeing me was quickly replaced by defensive hostility that confirmed the intimate nature of her relationship with David. "I thought you said she would be in the hospital until next week," Alejandra said to David with accusatory tone that implied prior discussions about my medical situation and recovery timeline. Her comment revealed that they had been planning activities around my absence and had not expected to confront the situation until they were better prepared with explanations and justification. The interaction between David and Alejandra demonstrated comfort and intimacy that extended far beyond professional relationships or temporary housing arrangements. Their body language, communication patterns, and shared familiarity with our apartment layout revealed an established romantic relationship that had clearly been developing for months, while I attributed David's behavioral changes to career pressure. "Alejandra, this is awkward timing," David said with frustration directed at her presence rather than remorse about the situation. "Elena came home early, and we need to discuss the living arrangements before making any permanent decisions about the apartment configuration. His response confirmed they had been planning to continue their cohabitation arrangement and had expected to manage my discovery of their relationship on their preferred timeline. The casual reference to permanent decisions about apartment configuration suggested that they had been discussing our home as if I had no rights or involvement in residence decisions. The realization that David and Alessandra had been treating our marriage and our home as temporary obstacles to their relationship plans created emotional shock that temporarily overwhelmed the physical pain from recent surgery. The betrayal was comprehensive, involving not only adultery but also violation of our shared living space during my most vulnerable period. However, beneath the immediate emotional impact, I experienced an unexpected sense of clarity and empowerment that would prove crucial for my response to this crisis. The complete revelation of David's character and priorities eliminated the confusion and self-doubt that had characterized my response to his behavioral changes over previous months. The situation was no longer ambiguous or open to alternative interpretation. "I understand the situation completely now," I said with composure that reflected analytical thinking rather than emotional reaction. "David, you have been conducting an affair with Alessandra and have moved her into our home while I was hospitalized for major surgery. The only question is what you planned to do when I recovered and returned home to discover this arrangement." The direct statement of facts forced David to abandon his deception strategies and confront the reality of his choices. His response revealed the depth of his selfishness and the extent to which he had justified betraying our marriage for personal gratification. "Elena, our marriage has been struggling for months, and you know that," David said with defensive anger. "Alessandra and I developed feelings for each other while working together, and we decided to explore whether we have a future together. I was planning to discuss separation with you once you recovered from surgery." This explanation confirmed that David had been planning to end our marriage while maintaining control over the timing and terms of separation. His willingness to conduct an affair and establish residence with his girlfriend in our shared home demonstrated complete disregard for my dignity and rights as his spouse. Alessandra's contribution to this conversation revealed her active participation in planning their relationship around my medical crisis. "David told me about your marriage problems and said you were probably going to divorce anyway," she said with defensive hostility. "We didn't think it mattered where I stayed since you were in the hospital and he was planning to move out eventually." Her casual dismissal of my rights and feelings confirmed that she had been a willing participant in betraying our marriage rather than an unwitting victim of David's deception. The coordination between them in establishing their relationship in our home demonstrated premeditated disrespect for our marriage and my well-being. The full scope of the betrayal became clear as I observed evidence of their intimate relationship throughout our apartment. They had been sleeping in our master bedroom, using our personal belongings, and entertaining in our living spaces as if they were an established couple with legitimate claim to our home. The violation extended beyond adultery to complete appropriation of our shared life and living space during the period when I was most vulnerable and dependent on David's support. They had transformed our home into their romantic residence while I was unconscious during surgery and recovering in the hospital. However, the most empowering realization was recognition that David's betrayal had provided complete clarity about our relationship status and eliminated any obligation to preserve a marriage that he had already abandoned. His actions had freed me from commitment to someone who had demonstrated fundamental lack of character and integrity. The shock of discovery was accompanied by awareness that I possessed resources and capabilities for responding to this crisis that David did not understand or anticipate. My grandmother's trust assets provided financial independence that would allow me to address this situation from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. More importantly, David's complete betrayal had revealed his true character in ways that eliminated any remaining emotional attachment or desire to preserve our relationship. The man I had married no longer existed, if he had ever truly existed, and the person standing before me was revealed as manipulative, selfish, and fundamentally dishonest. "David, I want both of you out of this apartment immediately," I said with authority that surprised even me. "Pack your belongings and leave today. We will communicate through attorneys regarding divorce proceedings and property division." The firmness of my response appeared to shock David, because he had expected post-surgical vulnerability to prevent decisive action. His assumptions about my dependence and his control over the situation were immediately challenged by my clear thinking and strong response to his betrayal. "Elena, you're being dramatic and unreasonable," David responded with continued attempts at manipulation. "You just had major surgery and you need support during recovery. Let's discuss this situation rationally once you've had time to process everything and think clearly about practical consideration." His suggestion that I was not thinking clearly represented one final attempt to maintain control through questioning my mental capacity rather than addressing his obvious betrayal. The condescending approach demonstrated his belief that he could continue manipulating the situation despite overwhelming evidence of his dishonesty and cruelty. However, the medical crisis had revealed inner strength and clarity that David had never seen before because our previous relationship dynamics had not required me to respond to serious challenges independently. The surgery recovery was actually enhancing my mental clarity rather than diminishing it, because pain medication had reduced physical discomfort without affecting cognitive capabilities. "My thinking is completely clear, David," I replied with finality. "Your character has been revealed through your actions during my medical crisis, and I have no interest in preserving a marriage with someone capable of such betrayal. You have 1 hour to collect your essential belongings. Everything else can be retrieved through legal arrangement." The decisive response established that I would not be manipulated or controlled despite my physical vulnerability. David's betrayal had actually empowered me by eliminating confusion and providing complete clarity about our relationship status and my future direction. The discovery of David's betrayal marked the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of a transformation that would reveal capabilities and strength that I had never been required to demonstrate previously. The shock of his cruelty was accompanied by recognition that I possessed resources for responding effectively to this crisis and building a better life independently. The immediate aftermath of confronting David and Alessandra in our apartment required strategic thinking that transcended the emotional shock of discovering their betrayal. While my physical condition remained compromised due to recent spinal surgery, my mental clarity had never been sharp. The complete revelation of David's character had eliminated the confusion and self-doubt that had characterized my response to his behavioral changes over previous months, replacing uncertainty with focused determination to protect my interests and dignity. David's reaction to my demand that he leave immediately revealed his fundamental miscalculation about my capabilities and resources. His expectation that post-surgical vulnerability would prevent decisive action demonstrated how thoroughly he had underestimated my strength and independence. The manipulative patterns that had been effective during our marriage deterioration were suddenly ineffective against someone who no longer cared about preserving a relationship that had been destroyed through his choices. "Elena, you need to think practically about this situation," David said with the condescending tone he had perfected for managing difficult client negotiations. "You just had major surgery and require assistance with basic daily activity. Alessandra and I can help coordinate your care while we work through the relationship issues that need to be addressed thoughtfully rather than through emotional reaction." The suggestion that his girlfriend could assist with my recovery care represented such profound disrespect that it clarified any remaining uncertainty about David's character and judgment. His willingness to propose that the woman he had been conducting an affair with could provide personal care during my medical recovery demonstrated complete disconnection from appropriate boundaries and human decency. "David, your proposal is not only insulting but reveals how thoroughly you misunderstand both this situation and my capabilities," I responded with composure that reflected analytical thinking rather than emotional reaction. "I have no intention of accepting assistance from either of you, and I certainly will not allow this betrayal to continue in my home while I recover from surgery that was necessitated partly by stress you created through your deception." The reference to my home rather than our home was deliberate and strategic, though David could not have understood the significance of that distinction. The trust arrangements that had remained confidential throughout our marriage were about to become relevant in ways that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics of our separation and divorce proceeding. Alessandra's contribution to this confrontation revealed her complete lack of understanding about the legal and practical realities of the situation she had entered. "Elena, you're being totally unreasonable about this. she said with the entitled attitude of someone who believed her youth and relationship with David provided protection from consequences. David and I are planning to be together, and fighting about it just makes everything more difficult for everyone involved. Her casual dismissal of my rights as David's spouse and owner of our residence demonstrated the arrogance and poor judgment that would soon be corrected through legal and practical realities that neither she nor David had anticipated. The assumption that I would simply accept their relationship and accommodate their convenience revealed fundamental misunderstanding about my character and resources. However, my immediate priority was establishing control over my living situation and ensuring my physical safety and recovery environment. The confrontation was creating stress that could compromise my surgical healing, and I needed to resolve the immediate housing situation quickly while developing longer-term strategies for addressing the legal and financial aspects of David's betrayal. I am calling building security to escort both of you from the premises, I announced while reaching for my phone with determination that surprised everyone present. You have 15 minutes to collect essential personal belongings. Everything else will be made available through legal arrangements once divorce proceedings are initiated. The threat of security involvement appeared to shock David because it demonstrated my willingness to take decisive action despite my physical condition. His calculation that post-surgical vulnerability would prevent confrontational responses was immediately proven incorrect by my clear thinking and firm boundaries. Alina, you're overreacting to a situation that can be resolved through mature discussion, David attempted with his familiar manipulation strategy of questioning my emotional stability rather than addressing his obvious wrongdoing. Building security involvement will create unnecessary drama and potential embarrassment for all of us within the professional community. The reference to professional embarrassment revealed David's continued concern about his reputation and career advancement, even while being confronted with evidence of his moral failure. His priorities remained focused on protecting his image rather than acknowledging the harm he had caused through his betrayal during my medical crisis. However, my threat to involve building security was not merely strategic position. Carlos, the valet parking attendant who had greeted us with unusual formality, had been employed by the building management company that reported to the trust administrators who managed my grandmother's property portfolio. His awareness of unusual circumstances in our apartment suggested that building staff had already observed evidence of David and Alejandra's cohabitation during my hospital absence. The building management protocols included security measures designed to protect residents from domestic disputes and unauthorized occupancy that could compromise safety or create liability issues. My grandmother's original property management arrangements had established comprehensive systems for maintaining building security and resident protection that would support my efforts to regain control of my living situation. While David and Alejandra discussed their options for immediate departure, I contacted Dr. Martinez's office to request priority consultation about managing post-surgical recovery independently. The medical team had provided comprehensive discharge instructions, but the current housing crisis required modification of care plans to ensure proper healing without the family support that had been originally anticipated. Martinez's nurse coordinator, Maria Santos, responded immediately to my call and demonstrated the professional competence and personal compassion that characterized the entire surgical team. When I explained the family situation in general terms, she arranged for enhanced home care services that would provide medical monitoring, physical therapy coordination, and practical assistance during the critical early recovery period. Ms. Tan, we understand that family situations can become complicated during medical recovery periods, Maria said with tactful professionalism that avoided intrusive questions while addressing practical needs. Our enhanced care program includes daily nursing visits, coordinate physical therapy, and emergency response systems that ensure patient safety during independent recovery. We can have services initiated within 2 hours of your request. The availability of professional medical support eliminated David's argument that I required his assistance for safe recovery. The enhanced care program would provide superior medical monitoring and practical support compared to the minimal and distracted attention that David had demonstrated during my hospital stay.
More importantly, the professional care arrangement would allow me to focus on legal and strategic planning without the distraction and stress of managing recovery logistics independently. The investment in enhanced medical services would prove minimal compared to the importance of maintaining clear thinking and decisive action during the critical early stages of addressing David's betrayal. David's response to learning about professional care arrangements revealed his continued attempts to maintain control through creating dependency rather than genuine concern about my well-being. Alina, professional care services are expensive and unnecessary when family support is available, he said with false concern that masked his desire to maintain involvement in my recovery process. The suggestion that family support remained available after his betrayal demonstrated David's complete disconnection from reality and appropriate consequences for his actions. His willingness to propose continued involvement in my care while maintaining residence with his girlfriend revealed the depth of his selfishness and poor judgment. David, you forfeited any role in my care when you chose to conduct an affair and move your girlfriend into our home during my medical crisis. I responded with finality that eliminated any ambiguity about boundaries. Professional care services will provide superior support without the emotional stress and betrayal that characterize your version of family assistance. The direct statement about his choices and their consequences appeared to surprise David because he had become accustomed to avoiding accountability through manipulation and deflection. The medical crisis had created circumstances where clear thinking and honest communication were essential, eliminating the relationship dynamics that had previously allowed him to avoid responsibility for his actions. Alejandra's impatience with the extended discussion revealed her expectation that the situation would be resolved quickly in their favor, without serious consequences for their behavior. David, this is taking too long, she said with obvious frustration. Alina is clearly not going to be reasonable about this, so we should just get our things and find somewhere else to stay temporarily. Her casual reference to finding alternative accommodations confirmed that they had not developed realistic plans for managing the practical consequences of their relationship decision. The assumption that their housing situation could be resolved easily demonstrated poor understanding of Miami's competitive real estate market and the financial resources required for luxury accommodations that matched their lifestyle expectations. However, the most significant revelation was David's response to Alejandra's suggestion about temporary alternative housing. Finding suitable accommodation on short notice will be challenging and expensive, he said with concern that revealed financial limitations I had not previously understood. Most luxury properties require extensive application processes and security deposits that could delay occupancy for weeks. This concern about housing costs and application procedures was inconsistent with the financial success that David had claimed through his Goldman Sachs advancement. His worry about accommodation expenses suggested that his lifestyle had been supported by our combined household income rather than solely through his professional earnings as I had believed. The realization that David might be financially dependent on our marriage in ways that he had concealed added another layer of deception to the betrayal I was processing. His concerns about housing costs indicated that leaving our apartment would create financial pressures that he had not anticipated when planning his affair and cohabitation with Alejandra. However, this discovery strengthened my strategic position rather than creating sympathy for David's situation. His financial dependence on our marriage meant that divorce proceedings would likely result in his seeking spousal support or property division that would require full disclosure of our assets and income sources. The trust arrangements that had remained confidential throughout our marriage would need to be revealed during divorce proceedings, fundamentally altering David's understanding of our financial situation and his leverage in settlement negotiations. The assets that I controlled through my grandmother's trust would provide resources for protecting my interests while ensuring that David could not manipulate the separation process through financial pressure. David, your housing arrangements are no longer my concern or responsibility, I stated with clarity that established firm boundaries. You made choices that ended our marriage, and managing the consequences of those choices is entirely your obligation. The establishment of clear responsibility for his situation eliminated any expectation that I would provide assistance or accommodation for problems that resulted from his betrayal. David's financial concerns and housing challenges were direct results of his decision to destroy our marriage through infidelity and deception. Building security arrived within 10 minutes of my request, providing professional intervention that ensured the immediate situation would be resolved safely and efficiently. The security supervisor, James Rodriguez, had extensive experience managing domestic disputes and property access issues, and his presence immediately established order and appropriate boundaries. "Good afternoon, Miss Chen," James said with respectful professionalism that acknowledged my authority as the primary resident. "Building management received your request for assistance with unauthorized occupancy issues. How can we help resolve this situation appropriately?" The security response confirmed my authority over our apartment and established that David and Alejandra's residence was indeed unauthorized rather than legitimate cohabitation. James's respectful tone and immediate recognition of my priority as the primary resident provided validation that I was acting appropriately in demanding their departure. David's reaction to security involvement revealed his recognition that the situation had moved beyond his ability to control through manipulation and persuasion. "This is unnecessary escalation of a private family matter," he protested with defensive anger that masked his awareness that his position was becoming untenable. However, James's professional experience allowed him to assess the situation accurately despite David's protests. "Sir, Miss Chen has requested that unauthorized occupants leave the premises," he said with firm politeness that established clear expectations. "Building policy requires that residents comply with such requests to maintain security and prevent domestic disturbance." The reference to unauthorized occupants confirmed that Alejandra's presence in our apartment was indeed illegitimate regardless of David's explanations about temporary assistance or housing emergency. Building security protocols were designed to protect legitimate residents from exactly the type of situation that David had created through his betrayal. Within 30 minutes, David and Alejandra had collected their essential belongings and departed from our apartment under security supervision. Their departure was conducted professionally, but with obvious resentment about the consequences they were experiencing for choices they had made freely. The immediate resolution of the housing crisis provided physical and emotional relief that allowed me to focus on developing comprehensive strategies for addressing the legal, financial, and personal aspects of David's betrayal. The apartment was restored to my exclusive control, eliminating the stress and violation that had characterized the discovery of their cohabitation. However, the most empowering aspect of this initial response was recognition of my own capabilities for managing crisis situations effectively despite physical vulnerability and emotional shock. The decisive action that had resolved the immediate housing situation demonstrated strength and resources that would prove essential for navigating the complex challenges ahead. The enhanced medical care services arrived as scheduled, providing professional support that exceeded the minimal assistance that David had offered during my hospital stay. The nursing team established comprehensive care protocols that would ensure safe recovery while allowing me to focus attention on legal and strategic planning. As evening approached and I settled into my reclaimed home with professional medical support, I experienced the first sense of empowerment and hope that I had felt in months. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also eliminated confusion and provided clarity about my future direction that would prove invaluable for the transformation journey ahead. The evening following David and Alejandra's forced departure from our apartment provided the first opportunity for comprehensive strategic planning since discovering the betrayal. The enhanced medical care services had established effective protocols for managing my post-surgical recovery, eliminating the immediate health concerns and allowing me to focus completely on developing legal and financial strategies for protecting my interests during the inevitable divorce proceeding. The nursing supervisor, Patricia Williams, had coordinated a care plan that included twice-daily medical monitoring, physical therapy appointments, medication management, and emergency response systems that ensured safe recovery without requiring family assistance. Her professional competence and genuine concern provided the foundation foundation for independent healing while I addressed the complex legal challenges that David's betrayal had created. However, the most critical aspect of my strategic planning involved contacting the trust administrators who had managed my grandmother's estate for the past 8 years. The confidentiality requirements that had prevented disclosure of my assets during marriage would need to be modified to allow full financial transparency during divorce proceedings, fundamentally altering the power dynamics that David believed existed between us. Margaret Torres, the senior trust officer at First National Bank who had administered my grandmother's estate since its establishment, responded immediately to my request for emergency consultation regarding marital dissolution and asset protection. Her extensive experience with high-net-worth divorce proceedings provided invaluable guidance for navigating the complex intersection of trust law, marital property rights, and strategic divorce planning. Ms. Jean, I understand you are facing a marital crisis that requires immediate attention to asset protection and legal strategy development, Margaret said during our confidential phone consultation. The trust structures that your grandmother established include specific provisions for protecting assets during domestic relations disputes, but implementing these protections requires careful coordination with qualified divorce counsel. The revelation that my grandmother had anticipated potential marital difficulties and had incorporated protective measures into the trust documentation provided both practical security and emotional validation. Isabella Rodriguez had witnessed too many family fortunes destroyed through divorce proceedings and had designed comprehensive systems for protecting her legacy regardless of the personal choices made by trust beneficiaries. Margaret explained that the trust documentation included irrevocable provisions that classified the inherited assets as separate property rather than marital assets subject to division during divorce proceedings. However, the income distributions that I had received throughout our marriage could potentially be considered marital property depending on how those funds had been utilized and whether they had been commingled with marital assets.
The key to protecting your interests lies in demonstrating that trust assets and income have been maintained separately from marital property and that your spouse had no involvement in trust management or investment decisions. Margaret advised with the precision that characterized her approach to complex financial matters. We will need to provide comprehensive documentation showing the complete separation between trust assets and marital finances. This documentation requirement would reveal the full extent of my financial independence to David for the first time, dramatically altering his understanding of our relative financial positions and his leverage in divorce negotiations. The assets that I controlled through my grandmother's trust exceeded David's Goldman Sachs earnings by substantial margins, eliminating any possibility that he could manipulate the divorce process through financial pressure or intimidation. The trust portfolio included the Meridian Tower building where we had been residing, 17 additional residential and commercial properties throughout Miami, substantial investment accounts managed by professional advisors, and business interests that generated consistent income independent of my consulting work. The total value of these assets had grown significantly since my grandmother's death due to Miami's real estate appreciation and strategic investment management. Margaret recommended immediate consultation with Victoria Castellanos, a prominent family law attorney who specialized in high-asset divorce cases involving complex trust structures and business valuation. Victoria's reputation for aggressive advocacy and strategic thinking had earned recognition throughout Florida's legal community, and her experience with similar cases would prove invaluable for protecting my interests. Ms. Chan, your situation requires an attorney who understands both the legal complexities of trust asset protection and the strategic dynamics of high-conflict divorce proceedings. Margaret explained, Victoria Castellanos has successfully represented numerous clients in similar circumstances and has established relationships with the investigators, accountants, and experts who will be necessary for building a comprehensive case. The recommendation for investigative support suggested that David's financial situation and professional conduct might require examination beyond the obvious evidence of his affair with Alejandra. Victoria's experience with high-conflict cases, indicated that comprehensive investigation often revealed additional deception and misconduct that could influence divorce settlement negotiations and asset protection strategy. Victoria Castellanos agreed to provide emergency consultation despite the late hour and weekend timing, demonstrating the professional urgency that characterized her approach to protecting clients during domestic crises. Her immediate availability and willingness to prioritize my situation provided confidence that I would receive the aggressive advocacy necessary for achieving favorable outcomes despite David's betrayal. Elena, your husband's conduct during your medical crisis demonstrates a level of callousness that will influence how courts and mediators view his character and credibility. Victoria explained during our initial consultation. However, protecting your assets and achieving equitable resolution requires developing comprehensive evidence about his financial situation, professional conduct, and the true nature of his relationship with his colleagues. Victoria's strategic approach emphasized gathering evidence that would support asset protection, while exposing any additional deception or misconduct that might influence settlement negotiation. Her experience suggested that individuals capable of conducting affairs during their spouse's medical emergencies often engaged in other forms of deception that could be discovered through proper investigation. The investigation would examine David's financial records, professional activities, and personal conduct to identify any evidence of hidden assets, professional misconduct, or additional relationships that could influence divorce proceedings. Victoria's team included forensic accountants, private investigators, and technology experts who specialized in uncovering deception in high-asset divorce cases. Many unfaithful spouses attempt to hide assets or minimize income in anticipation of divorce proceedings. Victoria explained with the directness that characterized her communication style. David's affair suggests poor judgment and entitlement that often extends to financial deception. We need to verify his actual income, examine his spending patterns, and determine whether he has been concealing resources or preparing for separation longer than you realize. The possibility that David had been planning our separation while concealing assets added another dimension to the betrayal that I was processing. His concerns about housing costs and accommodation expenses might reflect actual financial limitations, or they might represent strategic positioning designed to minimize his obligations during divorce proceedings. However, the most empowering aspect of this legal consultation was recognition that my financial position provided significant advantages for achieving favorable divorce outcomes, regardless of David's strategies or attempts at manipulation. The trust assets that he had never known existed would fundamentally alter the power dynamics of our separation and eliminate any leverage he might have expected to maintain. Victoria recommended immediate implementation of protective measures designed to prevent David from accessing marital assets or creating additional financial obligations that could complicate settlement negotiations. These measures included freezing joint accounts, securing important documents, and establishing exclusive control over shared financial resources. Elena, protecting your interests requires immediate action to prevent David from depleting marital assets or creating debt that could become your responsibility. Victoria advised with urgency that reflected her experience with vindictive spouses. Unfaithful partners often attempt to punish their betrayed spouses through financial manipulation or destruction of shared resources. The protective measures would also include changing access codes for our apartment, updating security systems, and notifying building management about the change in authorized residence. Victoria's comprehensive approach addressed both immediate security concerns and long-term asset protection through systematic elimination of David's access to resources and information. The financial investigation would begin immediately with forensic examination of David's Goldman Sachs compensation, benefits, and equity participation to establish his actual income and asset accumulation during our marriage. This analysis would provide baseline information for determining appropriate spousal support obligations and property division while identifying any attempts to minimize or conceal resources. However, Victoria's most significant recommendation involved strategic disclosure of my trust assets in ways that would maximize their protective value while minimizing David's ability to claim marital interest in trust-related income or property. The timing and method of revelation would be designed to achieve maximum psychological impact while establishing clear legal boundaries around separate property rights. Alina, revealing your financial independence strategically will eliminate David's leverage while demonstrating that his affair has cost him access to substantial resources that he never understood existed. Victoria explained with satisfaction that reflected her appreciation for comprehensive victory. The psychological impact of discovering that he destroyed a marriage to someone with significant independent wealth will be devastating and will motivate reasonable settlement negotiation. The strategic revelation would occur through formal discovery proceedings that would require David to provide comprehensive financial disclosure while simultaneously revealing the extent of my separate assets. The contrast between his actual resources and my inherited wealth would demonstrate the magnitude of his miscalculation in betraying our marriage. Victoria's investigation team would also examine Alejandra's background, financial situation, and professional conduct to determine whether their affair had influenced business decisions or created conflicts of interest within Goldman Sachs. The relationship between David and his subordinate might violate company policies and could result in professional consequences independent of our divorce proceeding. Workplace affairs between supervisors and subordinates often involve policy violations, ethical breaches, and potential legal liability for employers, Victoria noted with the thoroughness that characterized her approach to high-conflict cases. Goldman Sachs has strict policies regarding professional conduct and conflicts of interest that could result in termination or disciplinary action if properly documented and reported. The possibility that David's affair could jeopardize his Goldman Sachs employment added another dimension to the consequences he would face for his betrayal. The loss of his primary income source would fundamentally alter his financial position and his ability to maintain the lifestyle that had motivated his status-focused relationship decision. However, the most motivating aspect of this strategic planning was recognition that David's betrayal had actually provided opportunities for positive transformation that would not have existed within the constraints of our deteriorating marriage. His deception had freed me from commitment to someone who lacked fundamental integrity while revealing personal strength and capabilities that I had never been required to demonstrate. The comprehensive legal strategy that Victoria developed would protect my financial interests while ensuring that David faced appropriate consequences for his betrayal during my medical crisis. The combination of asset protection, strategic disclosure, and potential professional consequences would create accountability that reflected the severity of his misconduct. The evening concluded with Victoria's team initiating immediate protective measures while beginning the comprehensive investigation that would support our legal strategy. The enhanced medical care services continued providing excellent recovery support while I focused on developing the foundation for achieving complete victory in the challenges ahead. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I experienced genuine optimism about my future and confidence in my ability to navigate the complex challenges that divorce proceedings would require. The shock of his cruelty had been replaced by determination to protect my interests and build a better life independent of someone who had demonstrated such fundamental character defects. The transformation that had begun with recognizing David's true nature during my medical crisis, accelerating through strategic legal planning that would ensure appropriate consequences for his choices, while protecting the legacy that my grandmother had worked so carefully to preserve for future generations. The foundation for victory had been established through comprehensive preparation that addressed every aspect of the challenges ahead. David's betrayal had revealed his character completely while simultaneously providing the motivation and clarity necessary for achieving outcomes that would validate my grandmother's wisdom and my own strength in responding to life's most difficult challenge. The comprehensive investigation into David's conduct and financial situation commenced within 48 hours of my initial consultation with Victoria Castellanos, demonstrating the efficiency and thoroughness that characterized her approach to high-asset divorce proceedings. The investigative team included forensic accountant Robert Martinez,
private investigator Linda Thompson, and technology specialist Kevin Park, each bringing specialized expertise essential for uncovering the complete scope of David's deception and establishing the foundation for strategic legal action. Robert Martinez had spent 15 years analyzing financial records in complex divorce cases involving high-net-worth individuals and corporate executives. His expertise in identifying hidden assets, concealed income, and financial manipulation had earned recognition throughout Florida's legal community. His systematic approach to examining David's Goldman Sachs compensation structure, investment accounts, and spending patterns would reveal the true extent of David's financial resources and any attempts at asset concealment. Linda Thompson specialized in investigating marital infidelity and professional misconduct, with particular experience in cases involving workplace relationships and corporate policy violation. Her background included 20 years with the Miami-Dade Police Department's white-collar crime division, before establishing her private investigation practice. Her network of contacts within Miami's financial industry would prove invaluable for examining David's professional conduct and relationship with Alejandra. Kevin Park provided technology expertise essential for modern divorce investigations, including digital forensics, social media analysis, and electronic communication recovery. His capabilities extended to examining deleted files, recovering text messages, and analyzing online activities that might reveal additional evidence of deception or misconduct that traditional investigation methods might miss. The investigation began with comprehensive analysis of David's financial records during our marriage, examining bank statements, investment accounts, credit card activities, and tax returns to establish baseline information about his income, spending patterns, and asset accumulation. Robert's preliminary findings revealed several concerning discrepancies that warranted detailed examination. David's official Goldman Sachs compensation had increased substantially during our Miami residence, reflecting his success in establishing the Latin American division and exceeding revenue targets that had been established for the new operation. However, his spending patterns during the same period exceeded his documented income by significant margins, suggesting either undisclosed income sources or financial support that he had not acknowledged. Elena, your husband's lifestyle spending has been substantially higher than his documented income would support, Robert explained during our first investigative briefing. Either he has been accessing undisclosed resources, receiving financial assistance from external sources, or accumulating debt that has not been properly disclosed to you as his spouse. The spending analysis revealed frequent charges at luxury restaurants, exclusive clubs, and high-end retail establishments that exceeded what David's salary could reasonably support, particularly given our household budget discussions and his expressed concerns about lifestyle expense. The pattern suggested either financial deception or external support that had not been disclosed during our marriage. More troubling were regular cash withdrawals and transfers to accounts that were not included in our joint financial statement. These transactions occurred with increasing frequency during the period when David's behavior had become more secretive and his relationship with Alejandra had been developed. The timing correlation suggested that the undisclosed financial activities might be related to his affair and the lifestyle requirements that his relationship with Alejandra demanded. Robert's analysis also examined David's Goldman Sachs equity compensation, stock options, and bonus structures to determine whether he had been concealing the full extent of his professional compensation. Investment firms often provided complex compensation packages that included deferred income, equity participation, and performance bonuses that could substantially exceed base salary amount. The forensic examination revealed that David had been exercising stock options and receiving bonus payments that he had not disclosed during our budget discussions or financial planning conversation. These undisclosed income sources totaled more than 40% of his actual annual compensation, representing substantial resources that should have been included in our household financial management. David has been maintaining separate investment accounts funded through undisclosed Goldman Sachs compensation. Robert reported with the precision that characterized his analytical approach. These accounts contain substantial assets that he has accumulated during your marriage, while claiming financial limitations that restricted household spending and lifestyle choices. The discovery of concealed assets fundamentally altered my understanding of David's financial behavior during our marriage. His complaints about accommodation expenses, lifestyle costs, and financial pressures had been deliberately misleading, while he accumulated substantial personal wealth through undisclosed compensation that should have benefited our household financial security. However, the most shocking revelation emerged through Linda Thompson's investigation into David's personal activities and relationship history. Her examination of his professional conduct, social activities, and personal relationships revealed a pattern of deception that extended far beyond his affair with Alejandra. Linda's investigation utilized surveillance techniques, witness interviews, and public record searches to examine David's activities during the periods when he claimed to be engaged in client entertainment and professional network. Her findings revealed systematic deception about his evening and weekend activities that had begun months before Alejandra's employment at Goldman Sachs. Elena, your husband has been conducting multiple relationships over the past 18 months, not just the affair with Alejandra that you discovered, Linda reported during a confidential briefing that fundamentally altered my understanding of David's character and conduct. The pattern of deception and infidelity is extensive and involves several women who believed they were in exclusive relationships with him. The revelation that David had been conducting multiple affairs simultaneously demonstrated a level of deception and callousness that exceeded even my worst assumptions about his betrayal. The systematic nature of his infidelity suggested that his character defects were comprehensive rather than situational lapses in judgment during our marital difficulty. Linda's investigation had identified 3 other women with whom David had maintained ongoing relationships during different periods of our marriage. These relationships included a marketing executive at a competing investment firm, a real estate attorney who had assisted with Goldman Sachs client transactions, and a television news reporter who covered financial industry developments in Miami. Each of these relationships had involved elaborate deception about David's marital status, financial resources, and commitment to exclusive relationships. He had presented himself as either single or in the process of divorce to facilitate romantic relationships while maintaining our marriage and household arrangements that supported his lifestyle and professional image. David has been living multiple lives with sophisticated deception that required extensive planning and coordination, Linda explained with professional detachment that reflected her experience with complex infidelity cases. The level of organization and systematic lying indicates this behavior pattern has been established for years, rather than recent development during marital difficulty. The comprehensive nature of David's deception provided additional evidence for divorce proceedings, while demonstrating that his betrayal during my medical crisis represented the culmination of established patterns rather than isolated poor judgment during a stressful period. His willingness to move Alejandra into our apartment while I was hospitalized reflected the confidence and entitlement that had developed through years of successful deception. Kevin Park's technology investigation had recovered substantial digital evidence supporting Linda's findings about David's multiple relationships and systematic deception. Deleted text messages, social media communications, and email records provided detailed documentation of his affairs and the specific lies he had told to each woman about his circumstances and commitment. The recovered communications revealed David's sophisticated approach to managing multiple relationships through careful scheduling, separate communication channels, and strategic compartmentalization that prevented the women from discovering each other's existence. His digital deception demonstrated the same analytical thinking and organizational skills that had contributed to his professional success at Goldman Sachs. David has been using encrypted messaging applications, separate email accounts, and privacy software to conceal his communications with multiple women, Kevin reported with technical precision. The recovered data provides comprehensive evidence of systematic infidelity and deception that spans the entire period of your marriage in Miami. However, the most valuable aspect of Kevin's investigation was discovery of David's research into divorce law, asset protection strategies, and spousal support obligations that revealed his long-term planning for ending our marriage. His internet search history, downloaded documents, and consultation inquiries demonstrated that he had been preparing for divorce proceedings months before his affair with Alejandra became public. The evidence indicated that David had been consulting with divorce attorneys, researching asset concealment techniques, and investigating strategies for minimizing spousal support obligations while maintaining access to marital resources during separation proceedings. His preparations suggested that the affair with Alejandra was intended to precipitate divorce on his preferred timeline rather than representing spontaneous romantic involvement. David has been planning divorce proceedings for at least 6 months while continuing to deceive you about his intentions and commitment to your marriage, Kevin explained with clarity that reflected the comprehensive nature of his digital investigation. His preparation includes consultation with multiple attorneys and research into strategies for achieving favorable financial outcomes through timing and procedural manipulation. This evidence fundamentally transformed the legal strategy that Victoria would employ during divorce proceedings. David's premeditation and systematic deception would influence judicial attitudes about his credibility and character while supporting arguments for sanctions and adverse presumptions regarding any disputed financial issue. Victoria's strategic response to these investigative findings involved coordinating the evidence into a comprehensive presentation that would achieve maximum impact when disclosed during formal divorce proceedings. The timing and method of revelation would be designed to eliminate David's leverage while demonstrating the complete extent of his misconduct and deception. Elena, the evidence we have gathered provides overwhelming support for aggressive legal action that will protect your assets while ensuring David faces appropriate consequences for his systematic deception and betrayal. Victoria explained with satisfaction that reflected her appreciation for comprehensive victory. The combination of financial concealment, systematic infidelity, and premeditated divorce planning creates opportunities for sanctions and favorable rulings that will exceed standard divorce settlement. The strategic revelation would begin with formal discovery requests that would require David to provide comprehensive financial disclosure under oath while simultaneously presenting evidence of his concealed assets and undisclosed compensation. The contrast between his sworn statements and the documented evidence would establish perjury and support requests for sanctions that could influence property division and spousal support determination. However, the most psychologically devastating aspect of the revelation strategy involved coordinating disclosure of David's multiple affairs with the strategic revelation of my trust assets and financial independence. The timing would demonstrate that his betrayal had cost him access to substantial resources while simultaneously exposing the complete failure of his character and judgment. Victoria recommended that the revelation occur during a formal settlement conference attended by both attorneys and David personally. The controlled environment would allow comprehensive presentation of evidence while preventing David from avoiding accountability through procedural delays or strategic withdrawal from negotiation. David's reaction to discovering both the extent of our evidence and your actual financial position will be psychologically devastating and will motivate immediate settlement negotiations. Victoria predicted with confidence based on extensive experience with similar cases. The combination of comprehensive exposure and financial disadvantage will eliminate his ability to maintain the aggressive positioning that he probably planned for divorce proceedings. The investigative phase had revealed that David's betrayal was far more extensive than I had initially understood, but it had also provided overwhelming evidence for achieving complete victory in divorce proceedings while ensuring appropriate consequences for his systematic deception and cruelty. The transformation that had begun with discovering David's affair was accelerating through strategic legal action, supported by comprehensive evidence that would protect my interests while demonstrating the complete extent of his character defect. The shock of his betrayal was being replaced by confidence in my ability to achieve outcomes that would validate my strength and ensure justice for his misconduct. The foundation for strategic revelation had been established through thorough investigation and careful legal planning. David's calculated betrayal would soon face comprehensive consequences that reflected the true extent of his deception, while positioning me for complete victory in the challenges ahead. The formal settlement conference was scheduled for Tuesday morning at Victoria Castellano's downtown Miami law office, providing a controlled professional environment for the strategic revelation that would fundamentally alter the dynamics of our divorce proceeding. The timing had been carefully coordinated to allow completion of the comprehensive investigation, while ensuring that David would be required to attend personally rather than delegating representation to his attorney alone. David had retained Marcus Sterling, a prominent divorce attorney known for aggressive advocacy and sophisticated financial strategies in high-asset cases. Sterling's reputation suggested that David was preparing for contentious proceedings and expected to leverage perceived advantages in income, professional status, and financial resources. His choice of counsel indicated confidence in his position and likely reflected advice about minimizing spousal support obligations while maximizing retention of marital assets. However, David's strategic positioning was based on incomplete understanding of both the evidence that had been gathered regarding his conduct and the true nature of our respective financial resources. The settlement conference would provide the first opportunity for comprehensive disclosure of facts that would eliminate his leverage while demonstrating the complete failure of his assumptions about our relative position. Victoria had structured the conference agenda to begin with routine procedural matters before transitioning to financial disclosure and evidence presentation that would achieve maximum psychological impact. The methodical approach would prevent David from withdrawing from negotiations once the extent of our evidence became apparent, while ensuring that all relevant information was presented comprehensively. The morning of the conference arrived with crisp autumn weather that provided appropriate atmosphere for the decisive confrontation that would determine the trajectory of our divorce proceeding. My physical recovery from spinal surgery had progressed sufficiently to allow full participation in legal activities, though I continued utilizing prescribed pain management protocols that maintained comfort without affecting mental clarity. Victoria's conference room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, creating an impressive setting that reinforced her professional competence and successful track record. The formal environment provided appropriate context for serious legal proceedings while supporting the psychological positioning that would prove essential for achieving favorable outcomes. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.